What's going on, guys? National Master Nelson Lopez here, and in this video I'm going to show you how to play the Queen D3 lines against the French. Now, a lot of French players will have never even seen this move before, so the surprise value is tremendous. And even though it's an offbeat opening, it doesn't mean that it's bad, and if Black isn't extremely careful, he can get into a lot of trouble very quickly. So we're going to look at some lines where Black castles kingside and you launch a killer attack right from the start of the game. Additionally, I'm going to cover a bunch of lines where Black doesn't castle kingside and show you how to play against those. So by the end of this video, you should have a really good grasp on how to play the Queen D3 lines against the French. So let's get started right now. E4, E6, D4, D5, Knight C3, and Bishop to B4. Now this is the Winawer variation of the French defense. It's the most common line that Black will play. They can also play D takes E4 or Knight F6, but we're not covering those in this video. But like I said, Bishop B4 is the most common, so you will see this quite a bit when people play the French against you. And now is when we unleash the surprising Queen to D3. Now this is a very odd looking move at first glance, but it has a very interesting idea behind it. And here's what it is. Normally, 99% of the time, Black is going to capture your pawn, and since your knight is pinned, you have to recapture the queen, and then they're going to play knight to f6. They're probably going to feel pretty good about themselves because they just gained a tempo on your queen. And you're going to play queen h4. And you might be thinking, okay, we just violated a couple of opening rules. Number one, we brought our queen out early. Number two, we moved our queen multiple times in the opening. And number three, we didn't develop very many pieces. And despite that, the queen has a very interesting purpose over here on h4. And the main idea is that if Black decides to just castle here, your queen is perfectly set up for a killer attack on their king right away. And that is why this is very dangerous for Black if they don't take this line seriously. I have seen a lot of people play castles in this position only to get checkmated shortly thereafter. And that's what we're going to look at now. And then after we look at what happens after Black castles, I'll go back and show you what the other options are if they decide to leave their king in the center and play some other moves. So if Black is either ignorant of the dangers or maybe they're just brave and they don't really care, they might castle in this position. This move has actually been played quite a few times. And if this happens, you should be happy. This is the goal of this opening. You want them to castle and then you can launch a killer attack on their king. And it's really straightforward to play if you're white. You're going to play bishop to d3 next. And the idea is very simple. You're lining up on this h7 pawn. And if you can get rid of this knight here on f6, queen takes h7 is going to be checkmate. So the plan for white is very straightforward. Now, obviously, Black's going to make some moves. So let's see how this looks like in practice. But just as an example, c5 is a very common move that Black will play to attack your center. And you can defend it with knight to f3. And if they attack it again with knight to c6, now you can play bishop to g5. And again, we're just following this simple plan, lining up on h7 and trying to remove this knight that's defending it. So if you want to pause the video for a second and try to figure out what kind of moves Black might be able to play to get out of this jam, you'll discover that there's really only one move that makes sense, and it's h6. Because next move, we're taking this knight with our bishop, and then, like I said, we're checkmating on h7. So h6 is the only move that makes sense to block the queen. It also puts pressure on our bishop, and ideally what Black is hoping is that we'll capture, after he takes with the queen, if we trade queens, Black has nothing to worry about. All of our attack is gone, queens are off the board, and Black is completely equal here. But if we back up a few moves, instead of capturing on f6, we actually have a killer sacrifice, and it's bishop takes h6. After g takes h6, queen takes h6. So the first thing that you should notice is that Black's pieces are kind of tied up. So for example, this queen has to sit here to guard the knight on f6, otherwise we're just going to capture it. So he can't move the queen over somewhere else. And also the knight has to sit there to guard the h7 square, because otherwise we go queen h7 checkmate. So, you know, these pieces are pretty much stuck. The bishop doesn't have a lot to do. The rooks aren't doing much as well. Really, all of Black's attacking chances are coming from these three pieces. And so the most logical move is c takes d4, hitting this knight because of the pin here. But it's actually completely fine for you, and you have a sequence of moves that are just crushing. And when I first saw this myself, I couldn't believe that this idea was even here, because it's kind of complicated, but once you see it, it makes a lot of sense. So it goes like this: knight to g5. So you give up this knight, and then you castle queenside, which at first glance looks pretty risky because black's going to open up your kingside, but in actuality, it doesn't even matter. So he takes it, and you simply play the brilliant king to b1. The idea is that, black's pawn actually gets in his own way, so he can't really get to your king because his own pawn is in the way, and none of his pieces are really close enough to do anything. You, on the other hand, have all kinds of crazy threats. First of all, you have this discovered check on his queen. So you're simply threatening to play bishop to h7 check and then take his queen. That's one threat. You still have this queen h7 checkmate threat if he ever moves his knight. And there's another one that's lurking that I'll show you here in just a second, but it's this rook lift. So rook up to d3, over to h3, lining up for your queen to go to h8 checkmate. So let me show you what that looks like. If black tries maybe queen e7, so he gets out of this discovered check to save his queen, and he still defends his knight. Now you can do the rook lift that we talked about. So you play bishop to h7 check. He can't capture you because queen takes h7 is then checkmate. So the only move is to go to the corner. Then you go back to f5, check with the queen. Again, only moves for him to move his king, so he goes over here. And now you play rook to d3. And the threat is simply to go to h3 and then move your queen to h8 checkmate. And I want you to just take a second and look at the position and see if you find any moves that black can play. And the amazing thing is there's no good moves for him. Like, there's just no way to stop this rook coming over here and the queen going to h8. There's nothing that he can do. He can't move this knight because you have checkmate. This bishop, bishop c5, bishop d6, bishop here, bishop, nothing helps. He can't move the knight. He can move the knight here, but you're going to just play your rook there anyway, and it doesn't do anything. There's just no way to stop it. So, he takes your bishop, rook h3, and next move, that's happening. So, crazy, crazy checkmate. We're at, move 18, and the game is just over. And this is just a perfect example of, the type of attack that you can get from these queen d3 lines if black doesn't take it seriously and just castles. So be aware that if you play this line, your queen goes to h4 and then they castle, this is the type of attack that you're looking for. And this is a perfect example of how to do it. So now we're going to go back and I want to show you some other lines where they don't castle kingside because they don't have to. And you need to be aware of what to do if they don't castle. But this is the dream right here. So remember this position. Go back and learn this line. This one's worth memorizing just for the concepts behind it. It's one of the most fun checkmates that I think you'll find. So I hope you enjoyed that. But let's go back and look at some other options that black has. Okay, so we're back to this position, and maybe black is either afraid or smart enough to know that it's not a great idea to castle into this attack. And so I want to cover the 5 most common moves that black will play instead of castling and what you can do against them, just so that you kind of have a full repertoire here of something to play if you want to play these queen d3 lines. So the first line for black we're going to look at is c5. So it makes sense. They're just attacking the center with c5, but they're not committing to castling it. What I recommend you play is a3, and the idea is you want to force black to trade here so that you can get rid of the pin, also kind of boost your center pawn with the c3 pawn. And I want to show you a cool little line here as an example of what might happen. So bishop takes c3, recapture. Logical move for black is to put some pressure on this d4 square. He's got 3 attackers. You only have 2 defenders, so you need another one. So you play knight f3. And again, castling just looks like a very logical and natural move for black. But let me just show you, if they go that route, tell me if you've seen this before. Bishop to d3. After something like rook e8, you can play bishop to g5. And after h6, guess what? Bishop takes h6, g takes h6, queen takes h6. Again, white is crushing. Now it's a little bit different here. Black has this kind of tricky line that you should be aware of. C takes d4. If you play knight g5, he can actually play knight to e5 now, bringing his knight over to help out. So it's not as good for you as the previous line where you just had checkmate, but it's still completely winning for you. Bishop to h7 check. After he captures, you recapture, and he has to go to f8. You can play queen h8, and you've got this little fork here on the knight. So king e7 and queen takes e5. And I mean, this is you don't. There's no like immediate mate, but this is a very very fun position to play. It's winning for white. You've got lots of cool ideas. Very fun. So just wanted to show you that one. Let's go back and look at another option for black. All right, the second line I want to show you, what if black plays bishop to d7? So the idea is that they want to get this bishop that's a bad bishop and relocate it to this diagonal where it's a little bit more effective. But what you can do is play bishop to d3, and after they play bishop to c6, you play knight g to e2, and they don't really want to take this pawn because you'll simply play rook to g1, and then after they move, maybe back here, you can capture here. And very aggressive, nice, fun position for white here. So they probably won't take that. Most likely they will, let's go back right here. Most likely they'll play like maybe knight b to d7. And then you can simply castle. And this position is equal, but it's a little tricky for black. Like for example, they can't castle now, or they just lose to d5. So d5, the idea is you're threatening the bishop. You're also opening up your queen to threaten this bishop on b4. And if black tries to save them both by capturing here, so he gets rid of your pawn and defends his bishop, the problem is the knight on f6 was defending h7, right? So now you have checkmate. So that doesn't really work. So they can't castle in this position. They have to do, I don't know, something else. But it's fine for white. I prefer playing positions like this where there's lots of tricks that black has to be aware of. So that's another one that you should know. All right, the third option we're going to look at for black is knight to c6. And the idea is they're putting some pressure on the d4 pawn, and after you defend it with like knight f3, they're going to try knight to d5, and they want to trade queens. So if you take, they just can recapture with their knight, and the pressure's gone. There's no more checkmate threats and stuff like that. So that's the idea. I would recommend not trading queens, so playing bishop to g5, and then they'll either play f6 or block with this knight. If they play f6, you simply retreat your bishop to d2 to break this pin to break this pin, defend your knight. Alternatively, if they play knight c to e7, I still recommend playing bishop d2 because you need to defend this. Again, there's pressure here, so you have to deal with that somehow. So I recommend still playing bishop d2. And then one line that's pretty cool is if they try c5, you can capture it, and when they recapture, you can play knight to e4. So you're hitting their bishop. Logical move is to retreat to b6, and then you have this nice little bishop b5 check. And if they block, the problem with this blocking with the bishop is that the queen no longer defends the d6 square, so your knight can go in. Your knight can go to d6. Check. You have to play king to f8, and you have this little trick here. Knight takes f7, forking these pieces, and so they have to recapture. And then you can play knight to e5 check. After they go back, simply take the bishop, check again, queen to e4, and you're winning. Black can't castle, his rook's stuck in the corner. You've got all kinds of threats here. Terrible position for black. So that's just one line. He doesn't have to play all those moves, but it's just one to be aware of. Okay, the next option we're going to look at is if they play knight to d5 immediately instead of knight c6 first. Again, the idea is the same. They want you to trade queens, and then the pressure is just really gone. So I don't recommend that. Again, bishop g5, same kind of idea, just not wanting to trade queens. They'll probably play f6, and then again back to d2 to defend this c3 knight. And it's a pretty equal position. If they castle, you still have some nice pressure here with like bishop d3, things like this. So black still has to be careful, but that's just another one to be aware of. And the last line that I want to go over is queen to d5. It's kind of a weird looking move, but it's actually really annoying for you as the white player. And the reason is black simply wants to play queen to e4 check and trade queens, because your knight's pinned, so your knight can't do anything about this. And once he trades queens, there's no pressure, right? You did all that maneuvering with your queen, and then he's just going to trade them off. So I recommend preventing that from happening. And the way that you can do that is by playing knight g to e2. So you stop the queen trade by blocking that immediately. And then black might try like knight c6, and you have this cool little move, bishop to h6. The idea is that if he captures your bishop, you're going to capture his knight, and then you've got a fork on the pawn and the rook. So he probably won't capture it, but you're also threatening to just simply take this pawn. So the best move for black is to castle. And then you can try queen to g3, lining up here for a checkmate. Black can play knight h5 though, and threaten your queen, defend the checkmate, and after queen g4, he can play queen to f5, and really your best move now is to just trade queens, and then you have to retreat your bishop at this point back to d2 most likely. And this is an equal position, very playable. Unfortunately, we didn't get the awesome attack on the king side that we would have liked. That's kind of one of the things that's really annoying about the queen d5 lines, but this is just an example of what that line might look like. There you have it, queen d3 against the French. It's one of my favorites. A lot of attacking chances, especially if black decides to castle kingside. Hope you enjoyed that. Let me know in the comments below if you try some of these lines out, if they work or if they don't work. I'd love to hear that. Maybe I can do a follow-up video and answer some questions. Just let me know. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in another video.